Hi there, good afternoon. My name is Darren Taylor. I am the Marketing and Communications Manager for the British Association of Landscape Industries. Welcome to our first of four kind of deep dive workshops lasting around an hour or maybe just shy of. We've got two presenters for you today. One you'll see, hopefully this side of me or this side, depending on where you are on the camera. So a lady called Donna Le Carpentier, sorry Donna, she's a technical area sales manager for Addagrip. Addagrip are obviously accredited supplier members of Barley. And we also have Millie Sheffield, who is specification manager with us. So I'll be handed over to the two of those shortly to do their introductions. Millie can't be with us on the webinar, the webcam, sorry, today, because obviously the device she's using doesn't have a camera, but you will be able to hear her over audio shortly. Just a couple of house rules before we kick off. So the presentation itself, the slot we have is for about an hour. It may be slightly less than that by the time Donna gets through it. There is opportunities to ask questions at the end of this session. So hopefully you'll enjoy the presentation and the slides that you see. There's a good amount of technical detail in here. The first session obviously is about how to install resin-bound surfaces, which thought this was a good place to kick off the series of events. If you want to ask a question, you will find on the control panel there's a question tab. If you write your question in there during the event, either at the end or throughout, we will come back to it at the end and we'll do our very best to answer those. I believe Donna and Millie will also leave their contact details with you at the end of the event when they do the post-event wrap-up. So apart from that, Millie, Donna, obviously Donna, you probably need to leave your mic on. I'll come to you both now so you can do your introductions, and then Millie and myself will mute ourselves and disappear and let Donna do the majority of the talking. But Donna, I'm here if you need me, watching things from behind the scenes. All right, so I'll hand over first to Donna. If you want to do your introduction, Donna.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Darren. Thank you for joining this webinar, and it's a pleasure to have you all on board, and I hope you enjoy the presentation that we're going to do today. Millie will speak to you later on. We've got an offer on our training sessions that we carry out, and she'll be able to tell you all about that at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, my name is Donna Le Carpentier, and I'm Technical Area Sales Manager at Addagrip. I've been in the resin-bound surfacing industry for just over 15 years, probably nearer 17 years. So I've seen it from its infancy to the big animal that it's become now. So I'll start with the first slide, which what we're going to talk about here is actually resin bonded, because there is still an awful lot of confusion about what is bonded and what is resin bound surfacing. So resin bonded, as you can see from the photograph here on the slide, is a resin which is coated onto your surface, which has been prepared, and then an aggregate has got is then cast into the surface. It's a very thin surface and is only about between 3 and 5 millimeters, basically the size of the aggregate which is cast into the resin. It has a very high slip resistance on the pendulum slip value of 77. Now that just is a number. Anything over 40 is considered low risk and is suitable for foot traffic. So these are very high slip resistant, skid resistant surfaces, and are often seen on highways. The application of these is that it's squeegeed and then back rollered onto your prepared surface. An aggregate is scattered into that. You leave it for a few hours. You sweep or hoover off the surfacing. There's an optional seal coat that can then be put over the surface to fully encapsulate the aggregate, and it gives it that wet look. So it's rather than the natural stone, it looks like it's wet, and it enhances the colour more. So this is resin bonded, not to be confused with resin bound surfacing, which is what you can see in this slide. Resin bound surfacing, as you can see, allows water to permeate through and is applied at varying thicknesses depending on the traffic, which we'll come on to base build-ups, thicknesses, etc. later on within the presentation. But primarily, the big difference is resin bound is a certain thickness which is screeded down and allows water to permeate through. Resin bonded is much thinner, is a scatter system and is non-permeable, so therefore doesn't allow water to permeate through the system. Resin bound surfacing can be used in many different ways for different things. Here we've got a prime example of a tree pit. As you can see, it's exactly the same principle, but obviously around a tree. This particular one has just bark around the tree. It's a young tree, and that allows for the tree to grow. Typical build-ups would be about onto a loose aggregate, something like a pea shingle, and then the resin bound surfacing compacted within the paving, which is shown here, which acts as an edging. There are other different types of pre-grid systems that can be used with cell web, as you can see in the top right-hand picture, which is a fabric grid, which is often used in tree protection areas where you need to protect the roots. Again, this can be used as a sub base to allow our resin bound surfacing to be put over the top of it. The grid that you can see in the bottom left hand corner, these are often called eco grids. They will slot together. You have the male and a female. These slot together and again have to be backfilled with a loose aggregate to contain it, to form your base, to allow the resin bound surfacing to be applied over the top. As you can see here, this is some resin bound surfacing being applied over some grid. So the benefits of grid systems are you're not dependent on the quality of the sub base that you're going over. They don't necessarily have to just go over earth. They can go over tiles, you can put them over tree roots, you can put them over block paving. So there is no sub base, a sub base isn't required in some instances, and they can in fact go straight onto earth. So for foot traffic, you don't even need to do a dig out. We can show you some systems further along in the presentation. Often, again, you don't need an edging. There's fabric involved, or you can just haunch the edging of the resin bound surfacing over at the sides. Again, this can save quite a considerable cost. They're able to withstand quite a lot of ground movement. If you've got areas of clay where we get dry periods, which we haven't had for a long time with the rain that we've had recently, but certainly clay areas tend to shrink in dry weather, and you can get excessive movement which can be reflected through into resin bound surfacing. So the use of a grid system under your resin bound, it acts like a floating floor, and therefore any movement that you get within the ground, it protects the cracking being reflected through into your surfacing. And of course they're suitable with tree protection projects. So there's lots of benefits for using grid systems. This is a particular project that we've done, and if we go in order of the photographs there, up in the top left was a pathway. It was just soil, it was the earth, the ground. It was scraped away to make as level as possible, and a timber edging was put in place. The bottom left hand picture, it shows some hogging, some limestone, which is then used just to make the the ground as flat as possible rather than for a base. It wasn't used down the whole way of the pathway. The resin bound surfacing was then put on top of the grid system, was laid on top of the hogging. The resin bound surfacing was then put on top of that, and then the edging was removed and the pathways were left there. So there was absolutely no dig out required in this instance. So the flexibility and the porosity of these systems can be demonstrated in this video. This is a fabric, a geofabric with a grid. This particular grid is 7mm thick with 30mm of resin bound surfacing. Now what this demonstrates is the flexibility and the strength of the flexural strength of the system, again with water being poured through. Now you can see there's no runoff at all there on the surface. It's actually permeating right the way through the system. The camera will now go over to the surface and you'll see that there's no cracking in that surface. The back of the surfacing hasn't been broken. So it gives you an indication of not only the porosity of resin bound surfacing, but also the strength, the flexural strength, and the amount of movement, ground movement, that these systems can endure. Another type of system of resin bound, it doesn't just have to be different stone, different aggregates. We can also do aggregate and recycled rubber. Now this doesn't need to have a tarmac or a concrete sub-base. This can go straight onto type 3, and it's used a lot in woodland walks, cycle paths. This up here you can see on the top around tree pits, it's used a lot because it's got this flexibility that allows tree roots and gives it some movement. Again, no edging is required, although it's contained here in tree pits by the external paviours. So we get on to the types of resins that are available. Now there are two main types of resins that are used within resin bound surfacing. A non-UV stable, which is an aromatic. The benefits of these over the UV stable resins are they are lower in cost. So for public realm works, for cycle paths, for big pathways, where the look of it isn't as crucial, where the aesthetic isn't as crucial as the suds benefits of these systems, these are ideal. And they're obviously, because they're lower in cost, they make it a lot more cost competitive against the UV stable. As the name says, a non-UV stable aromatic resin will yellow under UV light. So the selection of aggregates is crucial in your selection, and it generally tends to be the darker colours. They yellow down. So if you've got silvers, blacks, they will actually show that the resin has yellowed slightly, whereas the dark buff browny colours, it just doesn't show up at all. These are the sort of colours palettes that are available for the non-UV aromatic resins. The UV stable, the aliphatic resins, they allow you to have a much larger selection of aggregates that you can use. Certainly the silver colours, the lighter pale whites, they tend to have a higher flexural strength because of the nature of the resin. So if you've got a bit more ground movement, they tend to have less risk of cracking, whereas the non-UV stables don't. But obviously the downside of these are the resin is more expensive. But as you can see from the colour palette there, you've got the silvers, the lighters, the very light creams, are available, and these are really the only colours that you can use with a UV stable. If you were to use non-UV stable, you would get a yellowing and it would be distinctive. The colouring changes quite quickly. You could actually park a car on a driveway, move your car a few hours later, and you would see where it has darkened down. So it is quite apparent, the colour changes on the much lighter blends. So we've talked about the resin. The other part is obviously the aggregates that are selected. We at Addagrip have selected the most suitable aggregates for these types of work, which is to their polished stone value, their crush value. So there is always the possibility with any natural occurring aggregate that you will get traces of iron ore, which would result in rusting. You may have seen or been aware of rough spotting, and we use, within our selection of aggregates, we use certain aggregates that have got much lower risk of that happening. So with using the blends that we have, you've got some assurances that there is less likelihood, although we can't negate it, that there is much less likelihood of rusting occurring. So what's the reason for resin bound and resin bound surfacing seeing such a huge uptake, especially in the domestic market? It's been around in commercial projects for 20 odd years, but we're seeing a huge upturn and increase in the uptake of resin bound surfacing for domestic projects. The main reason being it's SUDS compliant. People like the look of it, and it allows water to permeate through and fits in with planning. There's no planning permission required when you're changing from a tarmac to a resin bound surfacing, because it is SUDS compliant. There's no loose aggregate, you don't get that loose kick up, and it's got very low maintenance, minimal maintenance. You may get the odd weed appearing in your surfacing, however, it's not growing through your surfacing, it's often airborne from birds dropping seeds, but they're very easy to either pull out or just put a jet wash over it, and the maintenance is very, very low. It's also, from the point of installation, it's a very quick installation. A team of 3 or 4 can do up to 300 square meters a day. So you get a much quicker installation than you would say from block paving. It's also very quick to traffic afterwards. You can traffic it within 24 hours of the install. So you can get back onto your driveways, onto your car parks, whatever it is where you've put your surfacing, it can be trafficked. You can walk on it within 4 hours. After about 4 hours, you would be able to walk on it. So certainly areas in the public realm will not be out of action for long periods of time. There's lots of environmental benefits as well to these systems. We have renewable content within our system. We have recycled glass, and there are lots of recycled materials that we use within the aggregates, and that gives it a very good environmental benefit. It's non-toxic and is very kind to the environment. Can be used around aquatic life and in pools and ponds and around swimming pools, that type of thing as well. So from a contractor point of view, of the tools that you require to install this, the main piece of kit that is required, the main expensive pieces of kit are the mixer, which you can see up in the top left hand corner, which is a forced action mixer. You can't use a cement mixer because it doesn't mix the blend, and you don't get that homogeneous mix of mixing your resin and aggregate, and you end up with dry patches which cause issues with it further along the line, but we'll cover all of that with things that can go wrong. The other major piece of equipment that you will need is a power float, which is exactly what it says. It's a power float which flattens off your surface, which gives a much better finish. And everything else is just hand trowels, a spazzle, a wheelbarrow. The two pieces of electronic kit that you can see in the bottom right hand corner are moisture meters, which will test the amount of moisture in the air and in your substrate, and also a thermometer, because there are parameters of when this product can be installed, which again we'll cover further along in the presentation. So as I say, you've got the Baron mixer, which is just a type of mixer. We find these are very good. They're man enough to keep the mix going, because you're going to put just over 100 kilos into these, and they need to be man enough to keep that mix going for the time that you need. So we find that these are the mixers that are used generally within the industry. So we've got all our kit. We know what the resin is, we know what the aggregate is, we know what kit we need. Now it's how do we install it? What do we need to install it on? We have several different base build-ups depending on the usage that your surfaces is going to have. So primarily we've got private driveways and rural pathways. You can see that they're very similar in their build-up. The sub-base is a type 3. On the rural pathways, we only need 100 millimeters of well compacted type 3. Type 3 is used because it has no fines, and it allows water that is permeating through the surface and through your binder course. It will permeate through your sub base. The driveway for vehicular use, we're looking for up from 150 for a private driveway, up to 225 if you've got a car park. So it really depends on the usage, but again, it needs to be a well compacted type 3. The binder course is an AC14 or AC10 open surface tarmac. The AC14 and the AC12 refers to the aggregate type within your binder course. AC10 is fine, but it tends to be more expensive than AC14. So AC14 gets used more, and you can see there the difference between the two is the depth. So for vehicular use, we're looking at a 70 mil depth, and for the binder course, it only requires a 50 mil course. So talking of the resin-bound surface itself, dependent on the size of aggregate is the size of the depth that you would need to go. So we can generally go up to a 10 mil stone, and the aggregates are blended so that they lock in together, and it's generally, rather than a single stone, by having a blend of stones you get more surface area touching each other, and that gives a much tighter blend. So we've got a 6 mil blend, which would be a blend of aggregate from anything up to 2 millimeters to 6 millimeters. And for vehicular traffic, that is required to be installed at 18 millimeters. And for if you go up to 10 millimeters, it would need to be up to 24 mil. For foot traffic, you don't need, because it's not having so much stress put onto the surface. All you need there is 16 millimeters for an aggregate blend up to 6 mil, and 22 millimeters for aggregates up to 22 mil. We've also got, as you can see on this slide, a 3 millimeter aggregate. This tends to be, we would say, semi-porous. It doesn't have the same permeability because it uses a much tighter aggregate. It has less voids, and therefore you tend to get less water permeating through. So it's semi-porous. But again, these thicknesses are much thinner on the 3mm stone, 16mm for traffic and 12mm for foot traffic. These are used rarely, as opposed to the 6mm and the 10mm application. On our website, which we'll give you details of, we've got all the different base build-ups for using cell web, for the grid bases, for all different applications. There's all the recommended base build-ups on there, so you can have that information from our website. So this is our cell web. So instead of a binder course, and instead of the type 3, you can go onto an optional membrane, which is to stop any migration from the soil permeating up through the system. But it depends on the condition of your soil as whether you have that or not. The sub base, which is going to support the resin bound surfacing, is a cell web, which I said is a fabric which has a type 3 granular base put into it. Now, this doesn't actually need compacting because it is held together by the cells, the fabric cells. It comes in rolls, it's rolled out and then backfilled with the type 3. And then the hand applied and troweled smooth finish of a resin bound surfacing of 6 to 10mm. It requires a 45mm depth of resin bound surfacing because you need to again dissipate the stresses that are going to be imposed upon it into the sub base. So this is if you're doing a full dig out or using a grid to put your base onto, but there are instances where you are able to go over existing bases. So if someone's got a certain type of driveway, this was a project that we did that went over tiles. They had the tiles were installed, and when they were wet, they were very slippery, they were cracking, they needed repairing. So instead of removing them, having to remove the tile, we could go straight over them. Now, what you can see there is a metal trim of edging that was fixed to the tiles, and then the resin bound surfacing was laid on top of that. Again, this project here was around a swimming pool. They had paving slabs that were firmly fixed. Now, obviously, if you've got any loose slabs that are broken or moving, they will need to be cemented down and fixed down to make sure that they are stable, because any movement that you have underneath, you have got the possibility of that affecting the resin bound surfacing, and that can cause cracking in your surface. Edging is crucial. You need to have edging to contain the resin bound surfacing. Now, this can be many ways of doing this. Certainly cobbles, granite sets are very common, and as you can see in the bottom right hand corner is a typical metal edge detail which is used. This is fixed to your binder course, and then it's different thicknesses depending on the thickness of your resin bound, and this can be used almost like a screed rail and an edge to work to level off. The zigzag photograph up in the top right hand corner there, you can see they've used metal edging to create different patterns. So you can use that to use you can use it on day joints as well. So if you've got a very large project which you're not going to be able to do in one one foul swoop, you can use the metal edging as a day joint and then come off the other side of the metal the next day. This was a particular project that we did which you can see in Glasgow, where they've done a map of the world. This was used by using a metal edging trim, and you can get flexible trim that was put in place, and then the grey was put in first, and then the larger amount, the blue, the oceans in this instance, was then put in once there was the world had cured. Quite poignant phrase at the moment. So what you need to ensure when you are installing is that you have the correct site conditions. You cannot install in the rain. Polyurethanes, which these resins are, get affected by cold weather. If the temperature is below 5, certainly with our resins, I know there are other resins in the market which have to have the 10 degrees, but ours you can lay in 5 degrees and rising. So otherwise the humidity and the cold affects the resin. You can't lay it in the rain, and you have to be aware of when there is bright hot weather as well, that it doesn't get too hot, because the heat increases the cure rate of the resin, and what you don't want is the cure rate to go off far too quickly, and it will go off before you've finished trailing it and getting the finish that you want. Our resin, we say, can be installed in temperatures between 5 and 30 degrees. Others are 10 to 25, but we have these parameters, probably the conditions, they're the conditions that you want to work in. Cold weather, everybody through the winter months is not installing very much resin bound surfacing at all, because of the sort of weather that we have in this country. And if there is a cold weather warning, we need to be aware. Now, what we have as an add-on for our products is we have a catalyst, so you can control the cure rate of our resins. So in cold temperatures, when it is down to 5, 6, 7 degrees, if you know that there's going to be rain later in the day or overnight, you can actually speed up and control the cure rate of the resin, which makes it very useful for contractors when they're at the end of the day in the winter months, and it allows them that control to ensure that the product is cured before it can be attacked by cold weather. So, aggregates, the basics are standard sizes of aggregates are from 0.5 mil, 1 to 2s, 1 to 3s, 2 to 5, and 6 to 10. This is how they're graded. As I say, the majority of our blends use aggregates from a 2 to 6 millimeter or a 6 to 10 millimeter size, and this is what we find you get optimum finishes, both in aesthetic and in performance. You need to avoid dust, so when you're getting your aggregates, if it's overly dusty, that will look that will be seen, and it will show in your surfacing as patches, so you need to avoid dust in your aggregate. And you need to keep your aggregates dry. If they get wet, they will affect the performance of the resin, and you will get blooming. It turns it white. The mixing procedure is, as we've said, you need a forced action mixer. It needs to be kept clean at all times, and the mixes need to be timed. We recommend 2 to 3 minutes for mixing, which will be enough for time for you to put your aggregates in. You put the larger aggregates in first, then your smaller aggregates. The resin and hardener is mixed separately in the bucket that is then put into the mixer, and then our mixes contain a sand, and the purpose of the sand is to ensure that you have sufficient slip resistance, and it also acts to give it slightly more strength and hold it all together. The reason we say time the mixes is because you can get stone grind. So if a mixer is left to mix for 10 minutes while operatives go off and have a cup of tea and think, oh, I'll do that one in a minute, it actually grinds the stone and you get dusting within your mix, and that will show as patches. And I can show you some projects where that's happened further along. So the mix goes straight into the mixer. It comes out of the mixer after a couple of minutes and is tipped straight onto your compacted surface or onto your grid system or whatever your sub base is. It is then spazzled to a consistent level, so it's primarily flat. If you were laying it at 16 mil, you would probably spazzle it to a level of about 18 millimeters, and then it's troweled and slightly compacted to close the surface. What you don't want to do is really ride the surface with the trowel, otherwise you can get trowel burn in your surfacing. It's literally a couple of swipes over the surface just to close the surface up and give it a nice uniform tight finish. When laying, you need to maintain a wet edge. If you don't, you will see it in the finish. So, which is another reason why you have to be aware of temperature conditions, which is another reason why you can't lay this in temperatures over 30 degrees. It will just go off far too quickly and you won't be able to maintain that wet edge. If you can maintain that wet edge, you will get a uniform, completely seamless finish. So I mentioned how to do it properly, correctly, but there are things that can go wrong. If you can see this picture in the top there, and you can see it's got a straight edge on it, it looks absolutely fine. However, at night, when you've got low level lighting, or even just driving on to a surface with your headlights onto a driveway, you can see it looks very bumpy, quite, you know, the undulation. And this is why we advocate the use of our power trowel. It doesn't eliminate this completely, but it certainly reduces it significantly. And we've not had, since we've been advocating the use of power trowels, we haven't had any issues with low level lighting and undulation. So it's best practice is to use a power trowel. So like I was saying about inconsistent mixing times with stone grind, you can see here where the batches have all been put in. You can see that roughly every 4 square meters per batch, and that is exactly the same aggregate, exactly the same blend. However, different mix times have created different shading, and it can be quite apparent, as is seen is this in this photograph here. We've also had instances of bald patches, which this should not occur. This is generally down to insufficient mixing. So if you haven't mixed enough, you'll get dry patches. Now you may or may not see this as you open the chute on the front of the mixer. It may or may not be apparent. If it is apparent, you just tip it back into your mix and continue mixing until the resin has fully coated all the aggregate. If it doesn't, you will get dry patches. So this can also happen if you don't have the correct resin aggregate ratio. So for 106.25 kg mix, you would need a 7.5 kilo mix of resin. Our BBA blends that we have all got the optimum resin mixed for the aggregate use. Some aggregates tend to be slightly more porous than others. The silver grey granite being one of them, and they tend to soak up a bit of the resin. The only way to get over this is to remove the loose area and then patch repair it. And unfortunately, you will see a patch repair. It's very rare that you get a patch repair that doesn't look like exactly what it says, a patch repair. So it is important that you get your mix right in the first instance. This is where a day joint, or where a wet edge hasn't been maintained. So in this particular case, the contractor finished their day joint, went home, went back the next day, and you can see here it's quite apparent where the next day's work carried on from. Now, the best way to eliminate this is either you'll find in certain projects if they will have a natural break, or you can put cobbles in or some sort of feature, or if you want it to look as seamless as possible, the best edging to use would be the metal trim, which is about 2 to 3 millimeters wide. Again, this is what we said about providing you lay in the correct weather conditions, it's going to be, your resin will perform exactly how it should. However, if it's caused by high humidity in the air, or if your aggregates become wet, or if it's rained on very soon after application, you will get a blooming. Now, there is only one thing to do, that's either pull it up and reinstall it, or you can overlay it, which is slightly cheaper option, but it's not always possible due to levels. As you can see here, there's sort of doorways, garage doors, etc. You cannot always put another 18, 16, 20 millimeters on top, and you would have to reinstall it and remove it, which no one wants to do. So if you're going on to a concrete subbase, which you can do, there are permeable subbases, concrete subbases, but concrete tends to have movement joints in it. It requires movement joints in it, which is why tarmac is used for your subbase in most occasions. But if it doesn't, you can get reflective cracking. So what you would need to do is put either a pre-formed movement joint, or put a saw cut in and then a movement joint retrospectively once the product is cured. But they must be reflected through in the surface, otherwise you will get reflective cracking. So we've now put our now understand all the pitfalls that can go wrong, but hopefully they don't. We've installed our resin-bound surfacing correctly, and there is an aftercare. We issue warranties on our products, and on our BBA certificated products, we can offer up to 25 years manufacturer's product warranty in line with the BBA certificate, which comes with our Addaset, Addabound and TerraBound ranges. What we suggest as the maintenance and the aftercare is a medium jet wash. That would be suitable. We also have a machine which we call an MC machine, which has got wire brushes on it and will give a really good deep clean into the voids if it's silted up. This was in our depot and had been down for about 15 years. It was on the north side. It had quite a lot of moss that had grown and built up over the years. We'd not done anything to do it, and you can see that even after 15 years you could get it back looking as good as new. Just a light detergent is all that's required over the surface. We also have products, a surface rejuvenator. What you will get over over time and over wear is the resin on the surface of your aggregate will get worn off either by vehicular traffic or by foot traffic, and your clients may want you to rejuvenate it to give it that just laid look, and it's a resin which is rollered over the surface to give it a refreshed, rejuvenated look. So that is us. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. I hope you've all learned something. These are our details, and you can go onto our website there and have a look at all the different products that we do there. We do offer a training to become a BBA approved installer for Addagrip. And Millie is going to tell you about the special offer that we have at the moment for the people that have attended our presentation today. So I'll hand over to you, Millie.
Brilliant, thank you. Hi guys, my name's Millie. So I have been working at Addagrip for 5 years now, and in doing all the specifications and working with the inquiries. So because you guys came along to our webinar series today, we are providing a discounted rate for our contractor training. So it will be a discount of £300 will come off of the price. So if any of you are interested in this and you want to get trained up, then please do drop me an email with your name and letting us know that you attended the webinar. We should receive a list from Darren anyway, so we'll know everybody that was here, and let us know if we can give you a little bit more information. So my email is millie, milly, at addagrip.co.uk. I'm sure we'll be able to email that all out to you guys. You've got our direct contact numbers as well.
So thank you, Millie. Darren, I'm hoping that there are some questions.
There are questions.
To test my technical know-how.
Test your know-how. Here we go. Yeah, there absolutely are some questions. So we'll jump straight in. So the first one is from Richard Gare. So Richard's asked a question. Now, apologies if I don't pronounce this correctly. Roughly how much more expensive would aliphatic be compared to aromatic in percentage terms?
Aliphatic aroma. I've got me at it now. Aliphatic. Non-UV and UV stable. That's probably a better way to remember it. There's approximately a 20% uplift in price for the UV stable. So yeah, a saving of 20%, there or thereabouts. Obviously, the aggregate part of the system remains the same, but yeah, it's about 20% cheaper to go for non-UV stable.
Brilliant, thank you. I hope that answered your question, Richard. Brendan McClernand actually sent two questions in. So Brendan's asked, do you have a similar CPD to cover resin bonded surfacing? And his second question is, if you do not need a permeable surface, presumably the best cost-effective option is to install a resin bonded surface rather than bound. So I don't know if you can answer those two things, Donna. So do you guys offer a CPD for resin bonded, and is resin bonded surface actually a best cost-effective option if you don't need permeable surface?
Yeah, right. I'm going to let Millie answer the first part of that question, and I will answer the second part. So if I answer the second part of that question first, with resin bonded, the resin bonded surfacing as a product is probably slightly cheaper than resin bound surfacing. However, the resin bonded surfacing has to go on to, because it is so much thinner, you're looking at a film of resin probably 1 millimeter thick, with an aggregate which is generally a 1 to 3 mil aggregate cast into the surface. You're looking at an overall a very thin surfacing, so it goes on to either goes onto a wearing course tarmac, a 6 mil wearing course, or you have to do a lot of prep to your sub base with shot blasting the sub base to expose the aggregate. So what we find is actually there is not that much difference in the overall cost of the resin bonded to the resin bound. The reason you would go for resin bonded over resin bound would be if you require that additional slip resistance. So I'm just trying to think, the last project I used resin bonded on was in an area, it was the back of Sainsbury's, where they had lots of heavy use, lots of small wheels where they on ramps where they needed that extra slip resistance. It was used on the Wembley Stadium, on all the ramps leading up to Wembley Stadium, because it was on ramps and they wanted the extra slip resistance. That being said, the slip resistance of resin bound surfacing, all of our blends are in line with the British standard and have a slip resistance of, they're all slightly different because obviously different aggregates are going to give you different slip resistance, but they're all in excess of 50. And if you remember, I said anything over 40 is considered low risk and is therefore fit for purpose. So cost wise, there's actually not a lot in the difference between the two. So Millie, if you'd like to take up on the CPD side of resin bonded.
As in whether it's, I completely missed the first part.
If we have one available.
On resin bonded?
Yes.
Yeah, so we actually don't have our CPDs resin bonded anymore. Again, it's kind of following off of what Donna said. It's mainly because it's just not something that's so much used in the industry as it used to be, mainly because it really can only be suitable for brand new projects most of the time, just in case there's any issues with the original base. However, the CPDs that we do have, we've got our resin bound surfacing CPD, which is our classic CPD. We've got a no dig resin bound surfacing CPD, which is for any kind of TPO areas, anywhere where you've got access issues, where tarmac and concrete really aren't an option. We've got our commercial sector CPD, which hones in on resin bound surfacing completely specified to a certain commercial sector, such as healthcare or education. So it covers all those different departments. And then our two CPDs that are on their way are going to be an innovation CPD, which I don't think I'm allowed to say the name of yet, so I'll have to wait for that one, but it's actually going to be on series 4, episode 4. If you're really excited, you'll definitely have to come to that one. And then our final CPD is on the Terraco side, which is our sister company, and covering all of their products.
Yeah, I think that our standard CPD does touch on resin bonded, and it does go into it somewhat, but not to the extent, because as Millie said, and as I've already said, we find that over the years the balance has completely gone the other way, and the cost implications are minimal.
Brilliant, thank you both. Very detailed answer. Thank you both. Appreciate that. And Brendan has acknowledged and said many thanks. So you've answered his question. So well done.
Thank you, Brendan. Glad to be of service.
We've got just one final question for this first episode, then, from Julie Cox. Julie, thank you for this. She says, does the cell web come with a membrane?
Right. The cell web comes with an optional membrane for beneath it. We're actually been working with cell web, and there is a membrane that again is optional to go over the cell web if required. So it would be really, it depends on how much movement you think you've got, because by introducing another membrane over the cell web, you're doing one of two things. You're increasing the cost of the overall system. However, if you feel that you're going to have excessive movement, by the addition of another membrane, you're isolating the bond from the resin bound surfacing onto the aggregate in the cell web, and it then becomes independent and has got more capabilities of moving independently from the movement that could be possible from the cell web. So it is optional of whether there is a membrane or not.
Lovely. Thanks, Donna. That's all our questions for now. I'm sure obviously what we might have, guys, is obviously when the recording is made available to those that have registered with us. So there you go. Julie said thank you. There you go. You have another one who answered your question. You're doing your job well, Donna. Yeah, there we go. It's always good to know, isn't it? And obviously we may have some other questions from people watching the recording. We've got a couple of members that have us to watch it on demand, so we'll make sure that's available. Just for those watching us live today, yeah, as Millie mentioned, we do have 3 other Addagrip events coming up with Barley over the next 3 months. So there's one each month. The How to Specify is next on the 23rd of June. Then we've also got the eco side of things, big hot topic at the moment, and obviously it's no different for resin-bound surfacing. That's on the 28th of July, and then the innovation one, which Millie mentioned, on the 25th of August. All of those are on our website, so if this has been of interest to you, you may wish to have a look at those. And again, for Barley members, they are free to book. So yeah, please take a look. So that just leaves me to say, really, thank you to Donna.
You're very welcome.
Very, very good presentation, Donna. Very, very detailed. And I think for Barley members and for us as an association, we get a lot of these problems, and we see a lot through our dispute resolution service. It's very common. Most problems are, or most problems I think can be resolved pretty quickly between opening communication between the client and the landscaper or the installer. But we do have some issues, and obviously definitely not naming any names, but we have had some issues in the past where more serious problems have occurred, and it's sometimes down to the way it's been installed. So I think hopefully this kind of content will hopefully will alleviate some of that in future. So if members can watch this, and obviously if they have any questions or if they want to come on your installer, your training programs, they know who to contact. So
well, I think both Millie and I have made ourselves available tomorrow. So I think if anybody wants to contact us tomorrow, just we could have a Teams call or phone calls, whatever, and we can drop in. So we're available tomorrow for any other follow-up questions that anybody might have, or if they want more information that want to discuss something more in detail, or any particular projects or any specifics, then that's something that we can do outside of this arena. That's not a problem.
That's brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Donna. And that's a great service that Millie and Donna are offering. Obviously, it's time out of the business for them, and it's obviously completely free for members to use. And like Donna said, it's a great opportunity if you have a bespoke project, or if you had a project, full stop, that you want to talk specifically one-to-one about, then please do take them up on that. There's some details there in the slides you can see before we finish. And obviously, you've got Millie's email as well, which is millie@addagrip.co.uk. And assuming, Donna, yours Donna@addagrip.co.uk.
It is. We're not very inventive with our emails. You certainly wasn't going to have Donna look upon to you, was I? That was never going to happen.
But thank you very much, Millie, Donna, and I will end the broadcast there, so we'll just turn off. But thank you, and thank you for those that tuned in today, and then we'll see you on the next event.
See you next time.
Thank you very much, everyone. See you later.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Very frustrating. Don't feel anything back.